Yo, 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 what is going on? IK Familia, it is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today we are back again to talk about some state of affairs and just really an update on what some of the ideas are out there about Infinity Kingdom, direction game is going in, what are just some notices, and I thought this was a good opportunity to touch on what I felt was a good conversation that started happening in the KvK chat room that we're taking a look at now. And I'm not 100% sure really kind of where it started for the most part. However, I think May 31st here is pretty accurate for where it did. This was yesterday evening. And I ended up chiming in a little bit early this morning. And I just thought I would read some of these to you, and just because again I thought the conversation was enlightening and I thought it was very stimulating. So I'm going to go through a couple of these. I'll read you mine at the bottom and just kind of give you my thoughts on how I view things, and I'll probably come out with another video that really touches on this in a more direct way, because I think it just is very important when it comes to the relationship between developers, the community, and really understanding the game. So before we get started, as always, if you enjoyed the content, make sure you sub, like, ring the notification bell, and of course, if you want to join and be a part of our conversation, hit up the Discord. You can find a link to that in the pinned comment description down below. Okay, so let's start off here at the top, and this one being from Arahant says, I agree with that assessment somewhat. My hunch is they already started moving core parts of the team to another game and are looking to do simple content updates to keep this game running and make some money. They won't close the game down, just will put it on life support as is tradition in the games industry and let it die slowly. What I do hope is that they take the learnings of this game to the next one so as not to repeat them. And so I think when I read this, I think to myself, okay, well, maybe I imagine it's something else that was posted above this. However, it is interesting because I've seen, even though I haven't played a lot of games from specific developers, if they've made multiple iterations of a similar game or a certain genre-specific game, if we're talking about Kingdom Builders or other, where they've kind of made a second or third one. I haven't really came across that yet, where I've actually participated in a follow-up title within a genre from the same developer. So that will be interesting if something like this does end up coming around. So I look at, right, what do I hope the takings? Then we get to tools. He says the only thing they learn is that they can what the heck out of their user space as long as they have some decent anime-style graphics. Stute says, that's a good theory, I think, considering they had IK players do a survey asking their opinion on the new GTA-style game they are making. And what's funny, this is interesting from Stute because not only that, but I know I can at least speak from some of the CC's perspective. I know, and I don't know who else they may have asked about this, but a similar question was asked to some of us when it came to, involving or covering to some degree when it came to kind of giving feedback, etc. onto. And I don't know if it was specifically because I haven't read everything there, but this seemed similar in that respect from what Stute said. So sure, I'm sure it is connected. Again, I haven't actually taken a look at the other new games, so I'm not really sure exactly what is or is not necessarily being offered there. With that in mind, then we move on to R90. He says, this isn't really true. IK would not be considered a success for a game company like Yuzu by any stretch of imagination. I suspect their run rate may have approached a few million USD per month at peak. Also, you want a game to run about 3 years, give or take, to feel like it was worth the endeavor. IK is like halfway, and it's already bleeding players like a diabetic on death row. Interesting. Okay. Aggressive. Yeah, I think when I look at the game, and I wish I knew I was more familiar with like metric sites to take a look at those types of things. I'm familiar with some, and I know one I use on the Android side, and then of course if you look at where a game was on certain Google Play Store rankings, right, as far as on certain strategy, right, spending boards for maybe where they were at peak versus where they are now. And so, I think when I look at it from there, it does seem that there is a decline, and I'm sure that is a culmination of many reasons that I would imagine most of us that like to kind of be in the know or just more aware of what's happening are familiar with. And then Tua says they killed the game with C50, most obvious thing in the world was C45. And some new skills, simple, nothing fancy, but now let's invent skill stones and drop C50 in everyone's lap. Also, game-breaking, strong new artifacts. Yeah, I mean, I think that is definitely a letdown. That's something that we talked about before, where it's hard to stomach that because if you're not, this is the thing, if you're going to increase castle levels, you have to be sure that you are providing enough things in the game to do that allow for the same, if not faster, rate of climb in order to hit those higher levels where you are like scaling it appropriately. So that way, as a free to play, you know, if I want to go into the game for 12 or 14 hours and play that straight, there needs to be enough things I can do in the game at that time to where I can increase my rate of progression overall. Compared to someone who's just coming in and spending money. Now, I don't believe that a free-to-play, for example, should be able to compete with someone who's like a high spender. However, a mid-spender, I would say low mid-spender, if not mid-spend, I 100% agree there. That someone that you should be able. And really looking at it more so from the approach of there's just enough things to do in the game to where if you log in 14 hours a day, every day on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, you know, something to that degree, there is enough things in the game for you to do to progress at a faster rate that puts you more in line with someone who would be spending money. I effortlessly agree there. Then we get to, Arnott says, I'm not sure if this assumption is correct. Actually, a game has to go wide or deep to make money to please the top brass. IK, after a year of operations, was simply not scaling widely to a large amount of players like Rise of Kingdoms, so they went deep. It was a judgment call. Is it the right one? On hindsight, definitely not, but looking back is easy. I do not know enough about Rock to comment on why that worked and this didn't, but moving player base from one game to another is tough, and IK has clearly had limited success here. Not giving them an excuse, but it's understandable. Right now, after this KvK will tell us if this game, what this game will really be like. If they had maybe gotten IB Premier League going earlier last year, the game would have scaled better, but that's coulda, woulda, shoulda. Personally, what I will say here is that, you know, if I was to look at where I think IK started kind of slipping in some of those areas, I think 1.8 was the big breaker for some, 1.6. But I think 1.8 for most is really where the big break was in seeing, because obviously with the announcement of the seasons and the cap increases, etc., that was really the area that turned the tide for that. And I think them not capitalizing / maximizing on what really made their game unique and stood out from others. One example of that is they went from everything costing AP to now when you are, if I remember correctly, I believe it's when you're attacking cities, not cities, but the PvE city structures, then now it doesn't cost AP. You know, just an example of something like that made the game so unique in the genre just because of that. The fact that they don't allow for unlimited troops. These are really important things that allow for your game to stand out above the rest. The fact that the point-to-point contact with just being able to relocate your city, super unique. When you just look at big titles, right? You can't do that in Rock. I don't believe you can do that in Lords of Mobile or State of Survival to my knowledge, unless it's been recently added in. These are things that really allow for a game to be extremely creative. I mean, if Rock allowed for, you know, relocation over a period of time, even if it wasn't something that was, hang on, sweetie, I'm almost done, okay? Okay, thank you. Yes.
Can I have heart food?
I'll give you in a little bit, okay?
Okay.
All right. So, you know, I wish that these things were in the game. You know, you just, even if you think about just adding something like that into a game like Rock and others, you know, how much that would really change the landscape where you wouldn't be dependent on always purchasing items to move around. And I think IK really touched on that in a very good way that didn't take away anything, right? They kind of added a time a countdown timer, right, to how long it takes you to get to point A to point B, but you could still do it faster if you want and pay. And so I think that really hits on the hopeful system that I really loved about IK in the beginning, was that, yeah, sure, you could still pay and still do things if you want to use premium resource or currency to do something, but you could still do it you could still do everything in a free-to-play way. And I think early on, it felt a lot more like that, even if it wasn't 100% there. And now it's just kind of gone down this path of, paywall gate, paywall gate, paywall gate, just more often than not. And that's not to say everything is, because it isn't. But it has been trending in that direction where more of the new introductions have been going there. And that, to me, is just unfortunate. Arnott says, my prediction is this game will simply dwindle, but the folks will enjoy continuing to play, and the folks like me who have invested too much until such a time where it's C62 exists. Yeah, I agree with this. If C60 is released, I'm done. Many will, and the game just itself dies. Last meeting with devs, we expected they will extend C60 by the end of the year, but look into Mysterium. There are new gears already, and yay, it means new castle levels. Not my interpretation is that they simply make the content together. Given that the game architecture for content is already set up, it's incredibly easy to add levels to gear, immortals, etc. Most of them don't even require any new animation, simply a new model with a small embellishment. So it's more likely they made the content, it's already in the game turned off. This is consistent with how we see immortals leak in various places way before they become available. They add them to the game and have a system where they debug the new content in a special server with flags. This is how I would set it up. Bottom line, the content is already in the game. It's a judgment call whether to release it or not. If they release it, my own PVV is that it will simply kill the game. It's interesting. I might have to reach out to Arahant, if that's how you pronounce the name. It definitely seems like some good insight here, and I would actually tend to agree with this as well, at the rate and how quickly sometimes the things are added into the game. And you notice after some of those things are added, usually it's not, at least from what I view, it doesn't really come off as buggy as when it's more of them kind of adding in something new, which they might have had to create from scratch. That kind of lends to that argument, or point, I should say. C60, Danny says C60 will definitely kill a large part of the player base, predominantly the free-to-play mid-spenders. Yeah, few whales will quit for sure, but majority whales will see it as is. Well, they've invested so much already, why stop now? It's apparently usually completely fudged up on the game since after update 1.6 released way too much pay-to-win content and events back-to-back. Their judgment call on taking such bogus risks was their downfall in the end, loss of large player base. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I think that's accurate. I mean, it's unfortunate, most of the time, if you ever hear me or see me making content, it's not usually coming from the approach of, hey, any game is awful, right? I'm not one to typically say those types of things or make those types of negative intended or directed videos. But I do think self-reflection and feedback and review is very important to do, right, in as much of a professional way as we can. So he says, I honestly can't believe they're merging servers. So I think technically it's not that they're merging servers, it's that they're giving players the opportunity to leave a server and go to another server free of charge, is what they're doing. When in reality, I actually think at this point, merging servers probably would be better, but it has to be done in a delayed fashion, where a server has to be up for a certain period of time, and then it has to basically check off a couple boxes before you can do it, but then you do it in a tiered way, right? Where you still give people the opportunity to reinvigorate the server, but if a certain amount of time has passed and there's just no way that's happening, whether that, let's just as an example, say a server has to be open for a year, right, before you consider merging it, right? That could be something, and then you have to make sure it's below a certain activity level, right? There's no indications maybe of, I don't know if I'd say of anyone coming there, but just some of those kind of default standard checkboxes that it would have to go. And this is just an example. But I think something like that would be appropriate when you go in and you look at merging servers specifically. Because if you're just giving people a free teleport, then, and don't get me wrong, right? People will still pay for teleports. They'll still buy them if they want to move to an active server. This is more for, an inactive, deadish server, where they're giving the people that are there that, let's say, for example, they may say something such as, maybe they don't give it to every player in a dead server. Maybe they'll give it to people that maybe they are able to figure it out and filter, where they say, okay, well, hey, if you've been actively logging in, 15 out of the last 30 days or something like that, right? If they can do anything like that, or just something that can gauge that they're active and it's not like a dead account for someone who's coming back because now they can move the account for free to a newest server. I think something like that, if you're actively playing and they can figure a way to know that, and then they offer those players the opportunity to move, I think that is okay to do. And if you think about it, it's not bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, right? I think merging players from an older server to a newer server, or merging servers, I think, and if you think about it, it is somewhat creative, because if you merge servers, you have to really figure out how does that work, right? Is the stronger server the one because basically it's not really like you're merging servers. You're basically just taking the player base and moving them from the weaker server to the stronger server, maybe out of the two. Right, so it's more of you're force migrating players rather than really you're merging. And I think because typically if you merge, you may have to reset stuff. I imagine it would be pretty hard to figure that out, because you still would have to be able to bring over alliances and their alliance level. Those are things you'd have to think about. So then it kind of comes into, is that really fair if the kingdom comes back and now they have a bunch of more like level 10 to level 9 alliances? Do you care if they do? So again, there's more to think about, really. And I think when you look at it of just giving players the opportunity to move from an old server, or kind of force moving them from an older server to a newer server, right, that could be something that you do where, the players' accounts aren't necessarily lost, because who knows, maybe someone comes back, 3, 4, 5, 6 months after playing. So that's something to consider as well. Then we go down a little bit more. Our odds says I'm over 100K USD, and I will stop, no question. Without the medium spenders, free to play becomes a competition among a bunch of whales. Like Game of War, I am out. Ollie, that sounds like our current SVS. I know it's getting close to the end of season. It's basically 2 mega whales. 1 mega whale brawling it out against the entire server, circling back to an aforementioned stream. Okay, and then I think I chimed in a little bit lower here. I did. So Boogie says, very interesting take. In my opinion, I think a lot of people didn't bother to try Infinity Kingdom because they just see it as a rip-off of Rock. When you think about it, IK has borrowed a lot of elements from Rock, even down to Immortals, probably thinking that by doing so they would replicate the success. But a lot of people don't see the need to play a game they perceive as a carbon copy of another game. So I think a part of that, from what Boogie's saying, is correct. I think another part of it, however, I think that's the lesser part. I think the lesser part is that they view it as a carbon copy, and I think more than likely what was really selling a lot of people, this is what you have to look at, right, is who was coming over and playing the game, right? That's really important outside of numbers, because that will tell you if you have garnered the attention. You had big YouTubers that were coming that specialize in playing Kingdom Builders, right? People like Legend Roni, Echo. You had some Clash players that came over. Eric One Hive, Clash Bashing. I think it was a State of Survival gentleman too as well. I'm totally forgetting his name. And so you had a few people, right? You even had Death Squad, which is a very prominent alliance group from Rock, and I'm sure they played other Kingdom Builders as well, but it's basically just like a group of spenders, and they came over. So again, there are a lot of things that I think IK did good, if not very well, in the beginning to get the type of attention that they got. What it came down to was that they were unable to retain the player base early because certain things were not announced or were not already in the game, and therefore it came off more so as an unpolished or unfinished product to some, rather than them saying, hey, these things are in the game, we are going to come out with them, this is our timeline. That would have allowed for more reassurance to be there rather than not. And so I personally think that the game did well enough for people to come over, but again, I think there's just some things that they could have done better and differently, and really stuck to that core difference early on, really highlighted how their game is different than others. And what that takes is an understanding of other games. You have to play other games and really know the ins and outs of them before you can kind of speak to those differences. And that's something IK and Yuzu as a developer could have done, but they didn't. Again, another example of, kind of being in the know. Really understanding what your game has to offer versus others and highlighting those things. It doesn't mean that you come off and say, well, Rock doesn't have this, but IK has this. It's more of, these are things that we believe allow for our game to stand out in the genre. Here they are, and this is why we think they're beneficial. And then I said, just reading up a lot of interesting views and the good conversation. For me, 1.8 was the big turning point, despite what came 1.6. Just because, again, I know that was like the thing where we ended up kind of starting to think about collecting signatures. Developer meetings started, and then let me see. Arno said he felt the biggest one was just the max building increase. I think that's big as well. For me, I think the bigger thing that stands out is it was really the bugs that ended up happening so often, so more often than probably on any other Kingdom Builder I've played, to the level and degree that they did for IK. And that's something that every single player deals with. When you think about level increases, when new players that are coming in don't really know about level increases, they don't know how the game used to be and what it is unless they hear from someone else. So that's always going to have a limiting impact. But bugs are something that can affect every single player in the game, right, depending where it is and when it is. Let me see here. And then, let me see here. Yeah, he's like, auto rejump prosperity bug is by far the worst one. Yeah, man, that was wild when I heard about that. And then I said, yeah, I said it's wild to see how long it takes a free-to-play to get one max march compared to other games, which now with the castle cap increase is that much more apparent, makes some other games look more appealing in this area, unfortunately. And I think that's the case. I mean, if you think about a free-to-play playing Rock, you can get an ideal, at least one endgame march in a lot less time than you can get one endgame late march. And I'm talking just from like non-equipment stuff. Like non the equipment, non-artifact. You can at least get one full endgame march in that respect faster than you can in IK. And that doesn't mean that IK needs to make it to where you can do that faster in other games, but I do think it needs to be somewhat relative, because even in my situation where, I was playing every day daily, and I was getting, compensation for the content I did, even I felt at that point that it was taking a while. So I can only imagine how a pure free-to-play must feel that it's taking, if that puts that into perspective in any regard. So, yeah. And then, and so, here, and then I think Arnaud said that every game is pay to win with the way we define it. That's not the main issue. A long time ago, my friend and I were trying to figure out what makes the game good. We came up with a metric number of interesting decisions per minute. A lot of games get this metric wrong. Some get it right. Not all games are successful, but they are most of the time. IK did not get this right, in my opinion. IK at the beginning feels amazing. Everyone grows relatively fast. There's so many alliances where you can participate in COR is beautiful. Once after the initial curve, which is typically after C30, this starts dwindling. But after T5, this pretty much just dies. KvK is way too long. It completely kills intra-server events. It requires way too much stamina. Symmetric. It is boring if you are not a huge whale, and massive grind regardless. Yeah, and I think if they added in something like pure rally marches where you could rally bigger players as free to play, it gives you more things you can do, more decisions, right? As Arhan is kind of hitting on in his decisions per minute idea. Insane amount of bugs in core parts of the game. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's big. Game industry is littered with failures of copycats because moving players from one game to another is way harder than it looks, but the investors love the idea. Oh, I'm sure they do. And so, I ended up pointing something out where I thought the long run for the game is a lot more important, because they could make more money in the long run while still potentially making just as much money as they were at their peak if they just approached the way they looked at the game differently. And I know Arhan had been mentioning, this is counter to how most game companies operate. Most games do not last more than a few years, understandably. So what you consider long-term is not an option for them. They either have to show results or die trying. All the multi-year successful games have the numbers to back the investment. This game did not grow. And I think for a few reasons that I mentioned is why essentially, it did not grow as well as it could have, and really build on that early success and just expand on that. Because word of mouth arguably is one of the strongest forms of advertisement. And if you look at, you're able to reel in a lot of content creators as they were early on, but just build on that. That could have been their one probably initial jumpstart opportunity to really start building momentum and more of it. And so I really think that, again, when you look at some of the things I mentioned in the beginning, these are things I loved and wished that IK just would have done more. And I think it would have really put them into a situation for, hang on, sweetie, I think it would have put them more into a situation for becoming more successful and more importantly, more sustainable by keeping a lot more players from their initial downloads to long-term player retention. With that being said, that's it for me. Didn't realize this video was going to go as long. Please let me know anything and everything you guys are thinking in the comments down below. I'll try and do a few more of these, later on. But again, I thought this was a great conversation. I just wanted to touch on in the KvK chat room. That's it for me. Until next time, I'll catch you guys later.